Well, good morning, church. It is good to see all of you. I hope that you're having a blessed Sunday, that you've had a blessed week, and all of that together. If you're visiting with us this morning, we like to say that we try to be at least a hospital for the hurting more than a country club for the righteous. So if that describes you, I hope that you feel welcome today, and we hope that you come to know the love of God a little better by your time in our family this morning. So there's a Christian author that I really enjoy. I've read a handful of his books. And in one of the books that I read, he shared a story from when he was in college in Portland, Oregon. Now, Portland, Oregon has a reputation for not just being a non-religious area, but in fact, they have more of a reputation for being anti-religious. That there is a culture that is antagonistic towards not just Christians, but religious believers of any kind in their churches and gatherings. But on his college campus this one weekend in Portland, the whole campus was shutting down so they could throw these wild parties, to the point where the university was even providing medics on campus who dealt specially with overdoses and bad trips from drugs and stuff like this. And so he and a very small band of Christians that existed on this campus in Portland, they decided they were going to do something bold. In the middle of this festival, this week-long raging party that was happening on their campus, they decided to build a confession booth right in the middle of the campus square. Now, like you could say, I think building a confession booth out in Dayton would be pretty bold, especially in a land that's known for being hostile towards Christians and churches. It felt extremely more so. And so all the college students who showed up there at their confession booth over that weekend were showing up for two reasons. One, to make fun of them and to mock them, or two, to just verbally berate them and to insult them for being so much holier than thou and everything else. But when the unbelievers, they stepped into this confession booth to either make fun or to insult, they found out that there was a twist to it. They sat down and they weren't asked to confess their sins, even though they were in the middle of some legitimate debauchery, okay? They weren't asked to confess their sins. In fact, when they sat down in the confession booth, the Christian who was already there and waiting would start confessing the sins of Christianity to the non-believer. They would apologize for the atrocities of the Crusades. They would ask forgiveness for the thousands of Native Americans murdered in the name of Christ during the Spanish Inquisition, or the church's role in slavery. They even confessed some personal shortcomings, to not follow the words of Christ, to attend to the needs of the poor, to not be judgmental in the world. And so these unbelievers who stepped in there ready to insult, ready to mock them, ready to yell at them, they walked away, as you can imagine, pretty surprised. But as he tells the story, not only were they surprised, they were thankful that the dozens and dozens of people who stepped in that confessions booth thanked them for what they were doing. And they walked away more open, having heard believers who were willing to admit their faults, to admit the faults of the church throughout history, to say that, hey, we have not always been good ambassadors of Christ like we were meant to be. You know, as Christians, we always want to stand up for the church, don't we? We want to defend her, to point out her good side, as we should. But there's a point where we must recognize that the church has a whole lot of skeletons in her closet, doesn't she? A whole lot of skeletons, more than probably most of us even realize. And for our witness to be heard, we have to be honest about that. I'm more and more convinced in this postmodern, post-Christian world that we have to be honest about our skeletons in the closet. You know, last week we introduced this new series on the importance of Christian assembly called Gathered. And last week our focus was on the beauty, the sheer beauty that happens here as when we gather together as the church of Jesus Christ. That we experience heaven on earth, that we encounter God in truly miraculous ways when you and I come together focused on Christ to be His church. And since we believe that, since we want as many people to participate in that as possible, we invite them, don't we? We believe that this is a wonderful place to be. We believe that there is life, that there is love, that there is forgiveness, that there is more found here in a community of faith. So if we're going to invite others to do that, if we're going to invite them to participate and call them to experience Christ Church, we have to be honest about the brokenness of this church as well. You know, we may love it. We may be blessed by it. We may find fuller life here. We may find that it's beautiful. But that's not everyone's experience, is it? We can't argue that the church hasn't lived up to its high calling. It is broken, and it has hurt people as much as it has blessed people. I think each of us here could probably stop and thinking of our lives of at least one person that we know who no longer attends faith because of a personal interaction they had with someone in the church. And they want nothing to do with church, whether that be family, friends, or someone else. They've walked away from faith, or at least walked away from the community of faith because they've been hurt, right? At least we could probably each think of at least, if not more, one person in our life that defines. And even though you're here this morning, and even though you may love the church, I would still imagine that each of you here has been hurt by the church, haven't you? I look out at everyone this morning, whether it's something that someone said to you, something someone didn't do, some Hippocratic failings of someone you respected, or anything else that was done in the name of God that was clearly not of God. I look out and assume that each and every one of you here holds some kind of scars that have been brought to you by your brothers and sisters in Christ. I know I've had my own wounds inflicted by families of churches throughout my lifetime. And on top of that, the idea that other people have been hurt, that we've been hurt, that the church has done so much damage is an even more unpleasant thought that I've been the one to hurt people, right? I can think of multiple times in my life that I am completely ashamed of where I've been the Christian who has damaged someone in some way and marred the reputation of God because of that. And I imagine I'm not alone in that either. You might carry scars, but I imagine that maybe once or twice in your life you've been the one holding the knife, that you've been the one who's hurt someone else. And we know that. And we regret that, and we probably cringe even at those memories. But this exists. And yet, so it's unsurprising that the number one reason why people leave the church, it's not because of dissenting science. It's not even because people just slowly drift away from wanting to be in a life with God and His people. It's because people have been hurt by the church, and so they want nothing to do with it anymore. And I know that stings. And you don't always expect your preacher to stand up on Sunday morning and say, hey, we're the reason people are leaving Christianity. But we as the universal church have to face the facts here. Like I mentioned last week, we talked about this for a little bit, that there's a growing number of people who want to have a relationship with Jesus. They read the Gospels, they read the Scriptures, and they think, that sounds good to me. I want to have a part of that. But they want nothing to do with the church. Right? That is a growing demographic. It's grown so much that sociologists have even kind of given it a term. On one hand, we've had a rise. The fastest growing religious group in America over the last decade, or 2 decades now? The nuns. I'm not atheist, I'm not Christian, I'm not Hindu, I'm nothing. But right alongside them is what they're calling the duns. People who claim that Jesus is the Son of God, people who read their Bible, people who pray semi-frequently, although studies do show that those practices, those spiritual disciplines, happen less for these people, which is important to recognize. But they've not attended a church service in over 6 months. Okay? They hold Christian values, they hold a Christian faith, but they've not been to a church service in over 6 months, and they're calling those the duns. In 2019, that group made up 15% of Americans. More than 1 in 10 Americans describe themselves as a Christian who had not attended church in 6 months to a year. And like those college students in Portland, I think one of the most impactful things we can do to address this is just to be honest. To be honest. To look those people in the eyes and say, I am so sorry. Whether you were the knife holder or not, right? To look at them and say, I am so sorry. To affirm, you are right. For many, your pain is valid. The church has really done a lot of damage. It has failed to be what Jesus meant for it to be. And I am so sorry. Maybe even to take a step further, to show some vulnerability and to say, to be honest, I've been hurt too. I know what it's like for you because I've been in that same spot. And we should do this out of a sincere, genuine heart, right? To be able to look at people who the church has hurt and say, I am so sorry that happened to you. That is not what Jesus is about. That is not what the church is about, right? But I think on top of just the sincerity there, if we can genuinely show that we're not blind to the church's faults, okay, if we have our own scars too, only then are we going to be trusted as a witness onto the fact that why the church is still worth it. When we can show that we're not blind, that we have our own scars, then we can truly witness to people that the church is still worth it. If they know all this, if they know that we take it seriously, but we still find the church to be important, if we still find ourselves showing up week in and week out, they're going to wonder why. If they know that you've been through the kind of things they've been through, and that you take what they've been through seriously, they're going to want to know why you're still there. If they're not there, why are you still there? And that's when we can confess, and that's when we can share and witness to the fact, yes, the church is broken, but she's still beautiful. She's still beautiful. No matter how broken, mangled, or ugly the church may become, and it may. Like I said, if you do any kind of church history, study of Christians from 0 AD to today, there's some ugly skeletons in the closet. Jesus still loves her. Jesus still finds her beautiful because in the church we still are drawn closer to God. In the church we're still inevitably discover that fuller life that God has once for us. The church is broken, but she's still beautiful. We can hold both of these things to be true at the same time, right? We can hold both of these things to be true at the same time. We don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I've been hurt by the church. There were times in my teenage and college years where my frustrations and my wounds had me wondering if it was worth it. If it was worth it to keep going, to still attend, to still be there. But every time I consider that question, I always found myself pulled back in by the fact that it is here, is amongst these people that I find the love of God in the world. I find the love of God in the gathering of the saints. It's the church who has cared for me when I've been physically down. It's the church that has invested in my life and in my character that has helped me become the man that I am today. It's the church who was there when I moved 3 states away and didn't know a soul in the world. The church was there waiting for me. And the church was there with open arms when I returned home that summer and years later, right? There was a church waiting for the woman I loved when she moved to a college and didn't know anyone. These are my people. This is where I find the love of God. They're God's people. And in His name, they have shown me the love of the Father. Have they hurt me? Yes. Have they hurt you? Probably. But I hope that if we can look with an objective lens, we see that there is divine love found in the body of Christ on this earth, and that is the church. I have a preacher friend in Nashville who recently wrote a book on this very topic. I just finished reading it over the week, and I'd be happy to loan it to anyone. It's fantastic. But in this story, in this book, he shares the story of how his mother was killed in a car accident shortly after the age of 8, after he turned 8 years old. And now as an adult, he looks back in his life, and he sees how it was the church, his local congregation, that stepped up and helped fill the gaps that were in his life that disaster left behind. He even goes on as far as to say that the church became like a second mother to him as he grew up. That he would not be who he is today, that he would not have made it out of adolescence had the church and Christian folk not spent the extra effort to be there for him in those hard times. Yeah, the church fails to be the body of Christ from time to time. And those failings have hurt people, and I have no intention of brushing that aside. I have no intention of discrediting that, invalidating that, or sweeping it under the rug. But I know the good that they've done as well. I've seen it. I felt it. The embrace of God. The embrace of others and the love that is had there. The wisdom, the care, and so much more that is had in these gatherings. This family, the church, is worth it in spite of her flaws. And I get that sometimes for those who have been severely hurt that can feel a bit phony, all right? That it can feel like under the lobby room, hey, I love your brothers, is, a sense of judgmentism and hypocritical nature underneath the I love yous. You know what I'm saying? It's felt sometimes that it's phony. And maybe sometimes that's true. Maybe sometimes we are judgmental. Maybe sometimes we are hypocritical. But aren't you too? Sometimes, right? Aren't you that person as well? I've heard people say, I think I've shared this from up here before. I've heard people say that, hey, I don't want to be a part of the church. That place is just full of hypocrites. To which I respond, no, it's not. We got plenty of room for more hypocrites. Show up on Sunday and join us at 10 a.m. Yeah. Look, this is a fallen world, right? People are fallen. People are sinful. They're broken. Therefore, the church, which is made up of real people, is going to be fallen and broken as well, right? It's a world of broken people. Therefore, it's a church of broken people. Expecting anything other than that is kind of simply unfair, isn't it? To expect that the church wouldn't be full of broken people, wouldn't be broken to an extent, is unfair. You don't expect that type of perfection from your book club. You don't expect that kind of perfection from your YMCA basketball league, right? And yet we abandon the church because she's so full of faults. And look, I understand that the church is called to a higher level of life and love than those other ones are. And we should be, right? We're dealing with the most important things in the world. We claim to follow a God of love. We should be better than any of those other organizations or gatherings that you could be a part of. We should be, absolutely. But demanding something that we ourselves can't live up to, that seems unfair, doesn't it? Seems unfair. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, one of the few German ministers to stand up against Hitler in World War II. In fact, that's actually another skeleton in the closet. In Germany, churches still have a hard time rebuilding their reputation because a large majority of the churches in Germany sided with Hitler. They consolidated their church with that political party, and they're continuing to recover from that years later. But Dietrich Bonhoeffer and a few others were some of the Christians who didn't, who stayed faithful in that time. And he was eventually executed by the direct command of Hitler in a concentration camp because of his rebellion. But during that time, he wrote a book about what it means to live a Christian life together, what it means to be a community of faith, to be a genuine church. And one of the most profound things, I think, that he wrote, especially in that book, is this. He who loves his dream of a community more than the Christian community itself becomes a destroyer of that community. Hear that. I'll read it again. He who loves his dream of a community more than the actual Christian community itself becomes a destroyer of that church, I'll say. Does that hit a nerve? It hits a nerve with me, especially in the circles that I've been in. Let me tell you right now, young ministers, we recognize the brokenness of the church as much as anybody else, okay? We don't have this rose-colored glasses where we don't see the faults and stuff. In fact, let me just tell you right now, out of the class that I graduated with in undergrad at Lipscomb, out of all the theology, Bible, ministry majors that were had in my graduating class, I think 30% of us are actually serving in churches. And that's not just Lipscomb. I see similar stats from my conversations with Harding and some other Christian colleges, that the many people who graduate and show up at 18 ready to commit their lives to serving churches, by the time they're done studying about what the church is supposed to be, what the church is supposed to do, and then interacting with churches through internships and stuff like that, you know what? They don't want to do it anymore. Because they see that. They see the problem. And this is nothing new. In fact, I discovered this too late for the PowerPoint, but I found this fantastic, that Paul uses pretty similar language. In Galatians chapter 4, when talking about being, working with a real-life church, he writes in Galatians 4, 19 and 20, "My dear children, for whom I am again in the pains of childbirth until Christ is formed in you, how I wish I could be with you now and change my tone, because I am perplexed about you." You ever felt like you were dealing with a church and it felt like you were going through labor pains with them? Okay, that's what Paul, word for word says. I am in labor pains with you as a church again until Christ is formed in you. But he didn't give up on them, did he? He was continuing to strive towards that. And in this conversation about ministers and young people who don't want to be a part of a church because we fail to live up to what we're supposed to be, it breaks my heart. It absolutely breaks my heart. Because there is so much beauty to be had here. There is so much good. It is worth it. When we love our ideals and our dreams of the church more than the real church, we end up hurting it more than we help it, don't we? We end up hurting it more than we help it. Obviously, we should call the people of God to a higher standard. And we should not settle for what is wrong and broken, but to sacrifice what is good for our dreams of perfection. I don't think that's the way forward. We can't settle. We don't stop. We don't condone. But we don't sacrifice what's good for dreams of perfection either. You know, we need to consider what the church is really for. What is the church for? Why are we here? What is it supposed to be? Sadly, from like the 1950s on, churches have kind of bought into this consumeristic model where we're trying to do everything to get people in the pews. Where we're saying, hey, let us serve you with this and put on that and do these cool things, to where you almost feel like someone walking into McDonald's getting what you want to make you satisfied, to make you content, to make you happy. But that's not what the church is supposed to be, is it? I'm not saying you feel that way. I'm saying that's how the church has been being built up over the last handful of decades. The church presents us with opportunities to grow. This is a gym, okay? We are training in righteousness when we are here. It's not supposed to be easy. Training, growing, it's work. And this community is here to push us in that growth and in that strength training. It's like a marriage, okay? Now, be careful. I asked Delaney if I could say this morning. I did. Okay, marriages are beautiful, but they're broken, right? And one of the elements to a marriage is that there is such a closeness, such an intimacy there that you can't hide, okay? Your flaws will be revealed in a marriage. They will be exposed, and you'll be forced to work on them. That's what a church does too. We come together in life to be an intimate community of brothers and sisters and mentors and mentees and so much more. And we force each other to grow. So no, it's not going to be hunky-dory all the time. It's supposed to push us to growth. And we live in a world that likes to give up, a world that likes to cancel that which is broken, a world that's oftentimes unforgiving and intolerable. But we as Christians, we must cling to the body of Christ. We must choose to keep assembling, to keep gathering together in spite of what drives us apart. Not in a way that settles for our failures, not in a way that dismisses wrongdoing, but we can fight for a better community without abandoning the community. We can reform the reputation of the church without neglecting that which makes it beautiful. We come together in love, committed to the mission of God as we gather together in community with His image bearers. That is what we are here for, and that is what still makes this beautiful. Because here's where we encounter Jesus, right? Here is where we fulfill our purpose in life. And here is the bride that Jesus died to save. She may have issues. She may look much different than she once did, but God's got a plan to redeem her. And we want to be there when that happens. I want to be a part of that redeemed body someday, don't you? If you're here this morning and you're ready to join this messed up family together, we invite you to come forward into the waters of baptism to enter into this community. You need only to come forward as we stand and as we sing.